a, a, a hush just naturally fell over the room. We've done 31 training events in this room this year, and this has never happened before. So you are clearly a attentive, ready to learn audience. So thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Tom Steinmetz. I've been the CEO here at Washburn for about a year and a half now, but I've been with Washburn for about 22 years. And I started back in the fall of 1995 as a day treatment intern. I started off as an intern. I was going to the U in our day treatment program. And I'm going to, as Brene Brown would say, lean into some vulnerability and share a story with you as a way of introduction. One of my very first memories of Dr. Ann Gearity, who's going to be speaking tonight, I was working in our day treatment program. This boy who was about 10 years old had managed to kick me, punch me, somehow get out of the secure locked wing that we were on and made his way down almost to the lobby before I managed to grab him. And I'm literally laying on the ground in the hallway by the lobby in Washburn trying to get the knife away from him that he had brought. You can picture the scene now. I hear a voice above me, and I turn and look up. And who's standing there? Ann Gearity. First thought, of course, that goes through my head is, one, I'm fired. I may as well just pack my stuff and leave right now. My career as a therapist is over just after it started. And instead, she leaned over and in this incredibly compassionate way said something like, "How can I help?" And Ann started by helping all of us at that time. So we're talking, this is 20 years ago now. Child trauma has not become the big talked about visible public thing that it is today. This was still very quiet. There weren't a lot of people talking about child trauma. And a lot of the approaches to working with young children who had experienced loss, attachment disruption, early traumatic experiences were honestly pretty punitive, pretty behaviorally focused, and very reactive, right? And she came in and really literally helped us rebuild the program that is now what's become our day treatment program with a completely different perspective in mind. And she's going to share some more about that today. But what I want to share and emphasize about Ann is, you can read through this very impressive bio. She teaches in the social work department and the psychiatry department at the U. She has her own private practice. She's consulted here for years and years. And she still has this extraordinary gift to take all of this amazing knowledge and really put it into practice in the moment, in her direct work, but also as an extraordinarily gifted consultant and trainer. There are literally thousands of therapists who are now practicing all over the state who've been students, who've been mentored by her, who've been trained by her. Now, that little work that we did, she got so inspired with it, it was the basis for her doctoral research at the University of Chicago. That was then grown and expanded and became what is now known as the developmental repair treatment model. We published a manual that Ann wrote that's available for free on our website about this. Last thing I want to say about it, that's what's so extraordinary to me as well. Even at that time, 20 years ago, most of the work that was being done about childhood trauma was about what's called discrete trauma. When your life is fairly stable, things are in fairly good shape, and then one event happens, and how you recover from that. We looked around, Ann looked around, did the whole review and said, okay, but what about very young children who've experienced chronic, complex trauma? Not the one event, but living day in and day out with repeated chronic trauma, abuse, and neglect. And there really wasn't something out there. So she created it. It's a remarkable achievement, and we've been very, very blessed and grateful to have her as a consultant and trainer here for the last 20 years at Washburn Center for Children. So I'm thrilled, I'm honored to turn things over and introduce Dr. Ann Gearity.
Thank you, Tom. Tom was my favorite therapist. But I'm really proud because many of the young therapists in that program, and they were so good and so discouraged and so defeated, and they've gone on to leadership positions in the agency, and it really was wonderful. And I don't know if I just said, can I be helpful, but I'm sure know that later on when we'd sit down and talk about these cases, I'd say, so he hit you and he ran away? Isn't that interesting? And they'd all look at me like, what? But it was interesting. So I am incredibly happy to be here. It's actually 22 years that I've been with Washburn. It feels like this is a culmination of many years of work. My title is ridiculous. I could spend hours with you talking about what children need to grow and thrive. And those of you who are being with kids have no time to spend hours learning that. So what I tried to do was make it some concise ideas that I thought that you could find interesting, and then hopefully we'll have lots of questions. So I decided I'd go clear and bold. All right, so we look at the world once in childhood, the rest is memory. And we know that childhood is really important. I was with someone this weekend, not a client, who said, my children are my oxygen. And I thought, what a lovely way to describe, her experience. My children are my oxygen. I was also with a parent who said, my husband says, I feel so responsible for my children's happiness. Really, I feel so responsible for my children's sadness. So I think we have to start out, and I use that word, the job of parents, teachers, and the community. It takes a village to raise a child is an African proverb. So I did some research and I found some variations. A child does not grow up only in one home. That's a Nyono language in Uganda. Whomsoever is not taught by the mother is taught by the world. That's the Swahili. Now, another way of saying this, and comes from a book that was just published by a man named Anthony Damasio. We are gregarious social animals. The homeostatic imperative is how do I feel safe in my own balance? Seek stability for itself and for those near and dear. So what I want to do tonight is talk about holding children near and dear. I want to talk about what development is and what development tells us about a child. I want to talk about developmental challenges. I want to think about understanding and decoding children's messages. And I want to think of challenges for parents, teachers, the community, and mental health providers like me. Many of you in the audience are probably of grandparent age. So I ask you to listen to this and really think about how do you become part of that village that supports your children's children and your grandchildren. Because raising children is hard work. I often romanticize it. I just spent 8 days with my son and daughter-in-law and their 3 children, aged 1 month, 2 years, and 4 years. And it was exhausting. And I say, I love that time. I was so happy when my children are young, and I have amnesia. So it was good to be reminded before this talk. It's hard work. So the first developmental need I want to talk about is sleep. And even before we get into what is development, we have to think about sleep. Now, these slides are here, and I'm delighted to share them, so we'll talk about how you get them if you want them. But sleep is incredibly important, and sleep starts with stimulation and regulation. So the first way that we learn regulation, which is the ability to maintain and regain balance in the face of change or stress or intense emotions, is we learn to wake and we learn to sleep. And this is no small task for a baby to learn to wake and learn to sleep. Wake and sleep are the first important processes, and we know, and it's a good reminder, that we do not function well psychologically when we're tired. There's a lot of research about, there's a book called Sleepless in America. We're all probably overtired, but many of our children are coming to school overtired. Now, schools have started to change. There are later starts. They're starting to think about that, but we've really got to think about how do we help our children sleep. And of course, Goodnight Moon is the ultimate sleep book. And if anyone's honest, it's the most boring book ever written. In order to put the child to sleep, but most of us fall asleep first. But development is also about imagination and aspiration. Let me grow up. You know, my grandson is going to be 4 next week, and he said to me, next I be 4, but then I be 5. All right, that push to grow up is so much in us until a certain point, and then we don't want it anymore. Developmental tasks. So as I've thought about development a lot, I've really thought about 3 tasks that keep repeating. The first is security, the second is exploration, and the third is mastery. We see these quite vividly birth to 5. We see children become attached and secure so that they can explore, so that they can master. But realistically, these repeat over and over again. The kindergartners are going to feel secure. And in 1st and 2nd grade, they'll start to explore. And then they'll start to do mastery. The middle school kid is doing the same thing, trying to feel secure. The high schooler is trying to feel secure in himself so that he can explore, so that he can master. And I think if parents think about that, what is my child doing right now? It helps us decode what's happening. Security emerges from early care. Young babies need predictable, reliable care. That's what we call attachment. And while this need lessens as children get older, it's the core of development. Attachment is turned on in moments of distress. So it's not just I'll be there for you, but I'll be there for you when you are distressed. And that's what makes attachment so vividly neurobiological, because when the baby is distressed, the mother or father arrive and they know how to jiggle and they know how to rock and they know how to soothe, and the baby's regulation is restored. So we now know that attachment is really a neurobiological as well as a neuropsychological process. I use this book because any of you know this book? It's a classic. I hope you had it read to you as a child. She taught them how to swim and dive and follow in a line and be careful of things with wheels. Right? So why did she say be careful of things with wheels? Because they almost got run over by a bicycle. Right? So it reminds us that attachment is not just about biological needs, it's also about cultural needs, the changing cultural environment, and you'll see where that fits in. No matter what age you are, your attachment stays an organizing part of you because it becomes internalized. You take your parents in for good or not. And when you're in distress, that's the part of your mind, of your brain, that's already often triggered. I had a dear friend who was walking his 87-year-old, very Alzheimer's mother through the hospital, and she looked up and she said, "But where is Mother?" Right? So it was in her still, and that's what makes it so important. Security involves learning self-regulation that always requires adult help. So we use it as a ladder, and we say it always starts with the adult doing it for you, and then you practice, and you get to dyadic regulation. So dyadic regulation, anyone parenting a toddler right now? Right? You say a lot of, we need a sweater. We should go to bed. We need to go to the potty. Right? And it's a joining in a very vivid way that says, you can't do it, but if I scaffold you, you can. And then we move to guided regulation. You go, you can do it, and then self-regulation. Now, self-regulation has become such a core of what we think of as mental health because we need to stay in our own balance. And a lot of our diagnostic categories are examples of how people lost their regulation. The thing about self-regulation is you don't learn it and then never have to do it. I could get dysregulated today, and I have to go through that process again. That's why often when I'm very upset, I'll call a friend and I'll say, can I tell you what's going on? And we borrow regulation from each other. We're very social people, and we need each other to regulate us. If one of you falls asleep because you've worked hard today, there's a part of my brain that will say, you're falling asleep because you worked hard today. And another part will say, oh, I'm doing something wrong, right? Because we depend on each other for that regulatory information. Children who are dysregulated, which is our population in day treatment and many of the other programs at Washburn, need adults more, not less. So when Tom said our day treatment models were punitive and isolating, we were putting children alone and saying, you figure it out, when these are exactly the children who need us to say, I'm with you. We'll figure it out. So that was the paradigm shift that was so important. Now, exploration goes with attachment like love and marriage. You can't be secure without having to leave the security. Right? So we have lots of examples of early childhood exploration. I will go and find her, she said. I will go find my mother. Exploration isn't just about physical distance. It's also about exploring ideas. And children, as toddlers, start to have ideas. And those ideas are really important. I have a lovely example of a toddler who was very precocious, and she said, I like pink. You like pink? She was 2. What's the right answer? I like pink, right. Now, a couple of months went by, and her mother was distracted, and she said, I like pink. Do you like pink? And the mother, because she wasn't as aware as she should be not aware, said, oh, no, I like green. And the child looked stricken. And the mother intuited and said, oh, green and pink, they really go together. Now, 3 years, the child says, because children love colors, I like pink, what color do you like? And the mother says green, and the child says, green is stupid. Pink is so much better. Now, what that demonstrates is she's exploring her mind. And she's not so scared to have a mind. A 2-year-old doesn't want to have a mind that's different from the parent. But by 3, they're starting to feel brave. Right? So exploring your mind is very important. Now, toddlers are also exploring rules. So toilet training is simply about rules. Right? It was okay for you to use a diaper, but now I say you have to use a potty. And the kid says, why? I like this way. And the parent says, you got to do it. And the kid says, no way. And the parent says, with all sorts of enticement, come on, you'll be a big girl. You can wear Minnie Mouse underpants, right? You can have jelly beans. And the child learns. And then they say, I did it. And the parent says, you did. And they don't say, you don't know how much work I went through. Right? Because it's about that exploring the rules. Now, one of my favorite books is Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. And it's, you know that book? It's a lovely book. And I got it from my very verbal first grandson. And it was finally a book you can say no to. I thought he'd be charmed. So the driver says, will you watch my bus? And the pigeon says, can I drive the bus? And this 18-month-old said, sure. And I said, no, pigeons can't drive the bus. And he shook his head. And we turned the page. And the pigeon came back and said, I'll give you $5. And he said, sure. And each page. So it taught me in this very visceral way, children have to learn social rules. They just don't know social rules. They have to learn social rules. And I remember a week later we were driving, having gone through the book many times and finally gotten the appropriate response. We're driving along and I say, oh, there's a bus. And he says, pigeon driving? Huh? So they have to learn the rules in life. Not just as some imposed idea. They have to practice the rules, and they need help. Now, this is really important because that's what young teenagers are about. You think you taught them the rules, and then they turn 13, and they got to learn the rules all over again because they're coming to it with a new sense of their own identity, but also of their own power. There's nothing as impressive as a 13-year-old who thinks she can do everything, right? And that confidence and that nasty sentence, "You don't trust me," right? And the answer is, I do trust you. I trust you to be 13, right? And you don't know the rules yet. So you see how development repeats. Now, exploration always has two parts: knowing there's a safe base to return to, and active company. And active company is often, "We can do this. Yes, I can." Yes, you can, but it should be, "Yes, I can." Yes, you can. I can. I can do it, right? Because that's what children are really trying to do, but they can't do it without our help. So again, I want you to think of preschoolers, but I want you to think of 6-year-olds trying to read, or 12-year-olds trying to, master a sleepover because they've gotten scared, or a 15-and-a-half-year-old trying to drive a car. This idea that company allows children to master. But company is based on knowing that if I fail my driver's test, I have a safe base to come back to, right? If I can't do something, I have succor and support, right? So much of adolescence repeats early childhood exactly because the child is now doing it for real, but needs that company and support. So the third area, exploration also includes finding my mind. And this is the area that I'm working on the most right now, is this idea of helping children find their mind. So the importance of knowing my own feelings, thoughts, desires, intentions, beliefs. It's called mentalizing. So it's not knowing what I think, but it's knowing how I think, how I can access this part of me that's so unique to me. Mind is really important because behaviors are complex communication, right? And they're complex because they come out of my mind. Children don't act on purpose. They act for a purpose. And that purpose is in their mind. Now, sometimes that purpose is not conscious. Sometimes that purpose is not even available to them. Your child throws a toy, and the first response is, "Don't throw that toy." And hopefully the second response is, "Tell me what happened. What happened, right? How come you threw your toy?" Now, those of you with preschoolers know that those are hypothetical questions. And then you have to do the work to say, "I think you got frustrated." That's called frustrated, right? And we provide language to children so they start to see that their behaviors make sense. That doesn't mean that their behaviors are right. We're not saying everybody's behavior works. We all have to change our behavior. But we can only change our behavior when it makes sense to us, right? And so making sense to us is really important. Some of my work in Minneapolis Public Schools right now is trying to help teachers shift from saying to children, "You did this," to saying to children, "Tell me what happened to you. Tell me what happened to you." Because unless children can put it into their own words, restorative justice is a fraud, right? So often our restorative practices are really, "I'll tell you what you did wrong and I'll tell you how to fix it," without repairing exactly what it is that keeps these children behaviorally stuck, which is they act out of primitive or impulsive, frightened responses rather than intention. So helping children know their mind is so important. And you parents and teachers and community, that's how we learn our minds, because other people see it. So mastery is really the fun stuff. Mastery says, I can explore and I can make it my own. So Where the Wild Things, of course, is the classic book. It's about early mastery about feelings and behavior. And even though when Max went off and discovered a whole world of similarly like wild creatures and became the king of all the wild creatures, he came home because he wanted to be with someone who loved him most of all. So he became less monstrous and more negotiating And luckily, his food was still warm, as you remember. Pete the Cat is a wonderful book, not just for little kids, but for all of us. Pete the Cat is a really cool guy who loves his white shoes. He loves his white shoes. And then he walks into a pile of strawberries. Oh, no. What color are his shoes? Red. Does he cry? Goodness, no. He just keeps walking and singing his song. So, any of you clinicians in the audience, this is the essence of DBT. I mean, it's distress tolerance. How do we help children learn to manage distress? Now, again, this is a really important idea because one of the things that's happening is we see this supposed rise in anxiety in our teenage population. I think it's actually a rise in an inability to feel like I can manage my own stress. So when you can't manage your own stress, when you can't solve it, you're going to stay anxious. So this idea that things go wrong, and what do? You figure something out, and you keep going. Now, Pete is not the smartest cat, so he just walks into blueberries, he walks into mud. But the end of the book is, the moral of the story is you just keep going, and it will be all good. Play with Me just reminds us that mastery isn't just about mastering me, it's also mastering social interactions. So we have to remember that as we help children manage, we're helping them manage not just with us, but with each other. This is the beauty of having siblings, but it's also the task of helping children leave you and learn to be with friends. And again, let me just keep going because you'll see why that's so important. So mastery is an incredible balancing act. And mastery always goes back and forth. So sometimes parents will feel very worried about their child because there's a regression. Regressions are normal. We all regress when we're distressed. We all regress at the end of the day. I will be not this articulate when I go home, right? Because we regress and then we go forward. Children and teens can manage new experiences when they are feeling confident and when their lives stay relatively stable. So we have to acknowledge that for many children, oh dear, when there's not stability, then their ability to grow is much harder. The importance of patience and realistic expectations I would share, but I'm not there developmentally. Right? So that's a very fast walk through development. Development is about regulation. It's about these 3 tasks. It's learning how to keep doing these tasks, finding enough security that you can explore and master. So what are the challenges? All right, the first challenge is connection is always a two-way street. I have to spend quality time with my parents or they'll become dysfunctional. This is never as evident in early adolescence. I'll confess, I remember going to Southdale with my then 12-and-a-half-year-old daughter, and I started to sing. I cannot sing, right? And I started singing. And she said to me, if you don't stop, I'll walk away and never come home. And I said, what? What? I was totally goofy, right? We get dysfunctional when we're not in sync, right? And so we weren't in sync. And often we get out of sync with our kids. And the importance of this message is you've got to think about your life and how present you can be to your child so that your child can be present to you. And often when there's child problems, the first thing we think about is, are the parents and child in sync, right? Because our kids get out of sync, and that's when we see behavior problems often. Now, I'm not saying being in sync is easy, but we always have to think of it as a two-way street. So it puts a lot on parents to say, what's going on for me that's making this hard? We talked about stress earlier with a group, and we talked about the 3 kinds of stress. So stress is important. Positive stress is inevitable and good. Tolerable stress is how we learn. Toxic stress is what we have to be concerned about. Toxic stress is described as too much for too long with too little help. Now, that doesn't mean that we can always control our lives. And there are times in every family where the stress is too much for too long, right? It's just part of life. But what we can think about is the too little help. And when we can think about too little help, then we have an idea of what to do. And this is, again, where the village comes in. So when families are stressed, we want to create communities where it's okay to ask for help. We want to have communities where it's okay to have needs, right? We want to create neighborhoods where it's okay to not be able to do it without losing your pride or your respectability. We have to help families because toxic stress happens to everyone at times. Oh, I lost it again. There's different ways to respond to stress, right? There's internalizing ways and there's externalizing ways. We often approve of the internalizing ways because they're so much more quiet. But the externalizing ways are they're not bad, they're just a style, right? So some children internalize their stress and some children externalize their stress. And we have to be respectful of both ways. And this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, for parents and teachers, because externalizing kids tend to make a mess, right? They tend to make a mess. They tend to disrupt things. They tend to make it hard to feel like you're in control. And then we get mad at them, and then we blame them, and we forget to be interested in what's causing their stress. So we really want to be respectful that stress changes how you function. Stress also changes how you learn. So a big challenge for parents is helping their children learn. And what we know about stress and fear is that the same parts of the brain that have to be available for learning get co-opted by fear. Right? Now, this is important to say for some of our more at-risk children who live in a lot of fear. It's also important to say to some of your high-achieving children who carry so much responsibility for their future that they get into fear states. The thing about fear, and fear is described as responding to immediate danger, where anxiety is anticipated danger. They're the same biological process. When you feel fear, there's a fear circuit in your brain that triggers a behavioral reactive circuit that then triggers a meaning-making circuit. So it's a closed circuit that makes you feel very helpless. And when children can't get into their learning brains, they can perform. This is one of the really tricky things about our brains. We can perform, but we don't remember it. So remember taking a test and pulling off a grade and then 2 weeks later not being able to remember a thing that was on the test? That's what happens when fear dominates. So we really want to help children get into their learning brains. Now, this has a lot of importance for any of you who are educators, because many of our schools, especially in our urban areas, are still operating with a lot of fear. And then we wonder why we can't crack the achievement gap. Sometimes missing at schools are all the wonderful parts that make learning enjoyable for children. I said to one of the very prestigious suburban districts that I thought that if they really wanted to do resilience, that 60% of the homework should be enjoyable. They did not follow my instructions. Right? Why should 60% of homework be enjoyable? Because children need to learn critical thinking, not facts. You can get every fact you need on Google. They need to learn how to learn. They need to be creative. They need to think of imagination. Who's going to be the next Steve Jobs? They need to have motivation. They need to want to learn. They need to have desire for achievement. They need to be connecting ideas and putting things together. And that's the part of education that often gets lost. I'll come back to that. So what are executive functions? Many of you have probably heard about executive functions or have concerns about your children with executive functions. Keep calm and get organized and you will be calm. Right? Children with ADHD are a good example. They cannot clean their rooms. But if you clean their rooms, they are so happy and they function so much better. Right? They need that kind of help with organization. So executive functions are skills that develop in our frontal cortex, primarily through experience, where we can get things done. Right? And children struggle who get things done are often very discouraged at school because they can't produce. Now, there's lots of pathways into executive function difficulties. Some is genetic, right? Some is because your father had this and you do too. Some is from stress. Some is from other learning problems. We see executive function deficits in children who have a lot of anxiety or depression. Right? We see a lot of executive function deficits in our day treatment kids who have a lot of disruptive behavior. So this part of the brain works best when you have the wherewithal to stay calm. And that's what we want to think about. So we can do executive function training with kids, but really, again, it's an experiential skill that they learn over time. Screens. I bet you wanted to talk about screens. Screens are really hard. You know, when I said about make way for ducklings, watch out for bicycles, well, in your generation, it's watch out for screens. They're really, really challenging, but they're not going to go away. So those of you who are trying so conscientiously to regulate screens, it won't work. They've got screens at school. There's screens everywhere. We are archaic. That's the future. So there's some things you can do about screens. I sent the Training Institute 3 articles. If you want them, we'll put them up on our website. When you're thinking of your kids with screens, there's 3 ideas. One is aim for balance, right? You want to help balance it. They have to use them, but you have to help them balance that with other activities. One of the things that I've come to say to families is don't regulate the time so much. Regulate how you get off. I think it's like dismounting. You know, gymnasts have to dismount. Kids have to dismount from the screen. And if it takes your child 20 minutes to dismount from his game, that's too long, right? They have to learn to be able to interrupt it because otherwise their minds are stuck. The second rule that everyone talks about is be a role model. This is hard. When I get bored, I take out my screen. I check my email. Right? We're all addicted to screens. So when you're raising children, be a role model. Really think about how you're using your screen. Develop work time and family time. I know one family that made the car a screen-free environment. Right? Nobody could use screens in the car except the GPS. And then everyone had to talk. And it was rough going the first few days, but now it's become part of what they do. The third thing they have to do is really make this a family discussion. Remember I talked about helping children find their minds? If you say to children, don't use screens, they will say, I want to. If you say to children, let's talk about how the screens make you feel, they will respond very differently. And I'm not beyond, can I do this to you? Do you mind if I touch your head? Saying to a kid, oh yeah, it's really soggy. Yeah, oh yeah, it's really soggy. I can tell you've been on too long. But that works with younger kids. It doesn't work with teenagers. But you got to negotiate, all right? Screens, you got to negotiate. Now, one of the things that, and we know that children under 2 shouldn't be watching screens, or if they do watch screens, watch it with them. But even older children, do things with them. Right? That's the thing about screens. Now, there's a lot of controversy about, I keep turning this off, Amy, I'm terrible, about screens and anxiety, and do screens cause more anxiety? And there's a fair amount of research that is correlative but not causal. So people are saying, oh yeah, screens and anxiety go together, but they're not saying screens cause anxiety or maybe anxiety causes screens. So again, as families, this is your 21st century challenge, how to help your children adapt to an evolutionary challenge that has to do with how their world will work. Right? It's every place. I was driving yesterday and I heard that by 2020, most McDonald's will no longer have cashiers. They will have screens. Right? And they talked about this. One man talked about this guy came into McDonald's and he had his earphones in and he didn't want to talk to anyone. So the screen was so much better. We're going to have a bunch of non-communicative futures. But the idea that we can eliminate screen is unlikely. So we want to think about screens and anxiety. And what we know is that anxiety, again, I use a term damn. And I told some of you about this already. Damn. And it's fun with children, not fun, but I'll say damn. And I actually have children who say, I'm not allowed to say that word. And I'll say, oh, no, not that one. Oh, no, D-A-M, like the beaver. So the word is danger, anxiety, mastery. And this is how our biology works. When there's danger, we get anxious. And then we have to master it. So when teenagers have social anxiety and they get anxious, Instagram is a good way of mastering it because you don't really have to talk to anyone. Now, Instagram is also a terrible way to master it because it creates another whole layer of danger, right? Because people are disinhibited on Instagram and they say things that they wouldn't say if they were looking face to face, right? So perhaps the anxiety is not the fault of screens, but actually is the students struggling to manage screens. So what I urge is for you parents and grandparents to stay interested in what they're doing because social connections matter, and they must be fostered intentionally. Whether children are preschool, school age, or high school, they need you. They may not know they need you, but they need you. Saying to a 14-year-old boy, come with me to the grocery store, is surely to get what response? Right? So then you say, no, I really need you to come because I haven't seen you all week. And if I don't know you, I don't relate to you very well. So please come with me because I need you. And most 14-year-old boys will say, okay. And by the way, I'll get you what you want at the store. That helps. They need intentional connection. And one of the biggest problems I see as an old person is that I think parents are so busy and kids are so busy that even the car rides aren't being the connection. I remember when my kids got to that age where I thought, okay, I'm a taxi cab driver and we just talk in the car. And even that's been threatened. So I think we have to think very intentionally about how to keep them engaged with each other, but also with us. Now, teachers are invaluable for this because teachers are not parents. And so they have a different meaning. And that's really important. All right, so our challenges. Something we all aspire to. How to talk to kids and how to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk. So these are some things that we do in our Washburn groups. We call it Fluency. There's 4 rules. The first is be interested in what's happening to your child. That word be interested is so important. Pay attention to the context, right? Look, use your better executive function to say, what's going on that can help me understand what this child is telling me with her words or with her behaviors. The second thing is name what you observe or imagine in words and tones that signal you want to understand. Now, that is really hard when you're frightened for your kid or you're angry at your kid. But there's a wonderful research finding that emotion lasts about 90 seconds in the brain. 90 seconds. Now, if you time 90 seconds, it will seem a long time. But 90 seconds is not that long. And after 90 seconds, the energy of the emotion is dissipated. So if you're still mad, you're carrying a grudge. Right? So go with your 90-second rule. Be mad for 90 seconds and then get interested. And signal what you saw. And signal what you guessed. and help your child know that you're not just mad at them, you're also interested. Allow time. You are helping your child and teen to find my mind and feel organized. So when your kid shuts down, instead of continuing to push, step away. Say, let's talk about this in 5 minutes. It really allows all of us, everyone should learn this, that when you're really upset, take a break. It isn't just little kids that need time out. We all need time to regroup, especially with teens. Don't insist on being right. Instead, be helpful. And finally, when this works immediately or after some pause, it becomes easier for the child and teen to engage in conversation that may even be reciprocal. Because that's what we want. We want reciprocal conversations. We want to feel like we're talking with. So what are the challenges for you parents? Pay attention to development. It really matters. 4-year-olds are really different than 8-year-olds. 12-year-olds are really different than 14-year-olds. 15-year-olds are a whole world different. The development actually provides resources that your child can use to hold their own with you. That's what it's about. So respect development, learn about development, watch the other 14-year-olds who are around, because development helps you know where your child is. Emotions must be nurtured and respected. We used to think Descartes' rule, I think, therefore I am. And now we know I feel, which allows me to think, which allows me to act. So feelings are important. They're not to be shut down. They're not to be discarded, but they're also not to be indulged. You don't have to feel all the time. You have to feel so that you can figure out what to do. Know that even smart kiddos cannot be emotionally precocious. And know that really stressed kiddos easily feel overwhelmed. So emotions can really trip kids up. The third is build active social interactions, even when your child insists. Be persuasive, not punitive, because punitive doesn't work. But kids need their parents. Negotiate screens and the impact of too much. Be interested in your child and what makes learning hard, right? Many, many children. I think back to when I was a kid and how the bad kids were probably the ADHD kids or the dyslexic kids, and we didn't know it. We know a lot about learning now. So if your child is struggling with learning, help them figure out why. There's reasons why children don't learn. Some of our programs in Minneapolis schools for emotionally behavioral kids really are classrooms of non-learners, 6 and 8 and 12 and 15-year-olds who still have a literacy way below their age. So they behave. It's really hard when you can't learn. Advocate for your children's needs. This is a big message, right? Our schools are overwhelmed. Our schools are struggling. Our schools need to get better. So be your child's advocate and help them negotiate school so it feels good. Now, and don't be a snowplow parent. Has anyone heard this phrase? This is a new one. So snowplow parent clears away all obstacles so that the child can walk blissfully into life. This is what creates anxiety, because you've got to master your own danger. Too little parenting attention or support is damaging to children, but too much or substituting genuine connection with clearing out obstacles is often also costly. Trust your child that he or she can find ways to support mastery with your support. That's your job. Now, challenges for teachers. Pay attention to development. It really matters. It's shocking how little training teachers get in development. It really is. It really matters. Stay committed to teaching the whole child and recognizing that children learn differently. Support children helping one another and build positive social experiences. One of the things that we do at Washburn and Day Treatment is we take these 6 totally, out of control sweet children who are just kicked out of schools. They've all been suspended or expelled. They don't get expelled so much anymore, but kicked out of school. And we bring them together and we try to make them a positive social group, which is no small task, but that's what they need. They have to learn how to have a positive social group. And we have to build positive social experiences. Do not shame the child who's struggling. I swear I came into this work because in second grade, Joseph LaBarbera was all the time in trouble. All the time. And I was terrified that the teacher would turn on me the way she turned on Joseph LaBarbera. But another part of me wondered, why wasn't anybody helping him? So help the children. Value behavior and take time to listen. And know that many children at school may not feel near and dear at school. And that will compromise their learning and their ability to learn and thrive. Many children do not feel held near and dear. And we have to tackle that. Challenge to the community. Value children. They will grow and they will have ideas and they will value us back if we are kind. We need to rebuild communities that really care about kids and their family. We've lost a lot of ground on that, and we need to think about how to do that. And challenge for the mental health clinicians in the community. Always consider that children need to feel secure, and parents and others who help them need to know them. That's our job. Our job is to help you parents, you grandparents, your teachers know your child in a way that you can do your job better. So I figured a link, but I'm not going to bother. It's, remember that song, To Know You is to Love, Love, Love You? I was going to play it for you, but you can sing it yourself. That's what we're about. So let me stop and let's do questions.
Yeah, let's give it. Thank you so much to Dr. Gearity. Thanks for everyone for coming tonight. So this is a great time for questions and answers. We set this up very intentionally to be a community dialogue. So this is a chance to ask whatever questions are on your mind. A couple things before we dive into that. We are recording the presentation for tonight, so anything you missed, this was a lot of incredible information. It will all be available through our website, and we'll have that available afterwards. The thing I'm going to ask you all to do when you ask a question, if I give you the mic and it starts going like this, no one will ever be able to hear you, and we won't be able to capture your question. So channel your inner Mick Jagger. And please just lean and speak directly into the mic when you ask your question. Then we can all hear it, and we'll capture it on the recording. So who's first?
Someone wanted to know about epigenetics. Anyone want to claim that? Okay. So epigenetics is a really interesting...
Just dive in with an easy one.
Can I do that? Well, I was prepared. I got warned. It's a great question. Epigenetics is a great term. I want you to have something to talk about at your barbecue this weekend. So genetics is, that whole nature-nurture. So we have a third dimension. We know that early experience has profound effect on the developing child because it informs regulation, but it also informs security and exploration. We also know genetics really forms us, and we are a product of our genetics. But what we've come to realize in the last 20 years is that not all genetics gets turned on. So epigenetics is the interaction of genetic potential or genetic vulnerability with environmental experiences. So it's very similar to what we know in health. I can have a genetic possibility of asthma because my mother had asthma, but it may never get turned on. And it may never get turned on because it's a recessive gene or because I live in a community that doesn't have the triggers. So it gets us to thinking about the interaction between my genetic potential and my experiences. Now, I was telling some people, I was at a talk yesterday at the university where this brilliant doctor was talking about trying to understand depression. And it was very much in epigenetics that we have, again, early childhood experiences and we have genetics so that we are all vulnerable to depression. It's a given. It's a fact of life. Now, how many of us move from that vulnerability to a major depressive episode has much to do with the epigenetic interactions. So it really gets us back to thinking not just what's my biology, but how has my biology affected my environment.
So all of the things that you mentioned tonight, all of those things.
Okay, hold on a minute. Oh, he's coming, Mick Jagger.
So all of the things that you've talked about here, they can actually have a future impact.
Yes.
And so you can make the change to your
so
biology.
That's the other thing that's shockingly interesting. So two things. All the things I talked about tonight, adversity is not terrible. It just is. And I can master adversity and become more resilient and become richer in who I am. Or I can be overcome by adversity and collapse and have less resources. So everything has the potential to give me vulnerability or strength. But the other thing that's amazing that we're discovering is that we carry in our genetics the epigenetic experiences of our grandparents and great-grandparents. This is a new, in the last 5 years, there's been more and more of that I'm carrying those experiences. And because I'm carrying those experiences, I have more vulnerability in the present to something repeating that vulnerability and toppling me. So, we want to think about who we are, and that's where narrative becomes so important. Because one of the ways that we manage the environment is we tell ourselves stories. So if I can tell myself a story about my grandparents and their struggles, and it can be a story that I can feel proud of, and I can see their ability to pass on to me a future, that's a mediator of that epigenetic effect. So when something bad happens to me, I have a story that empowers me. But if I don't have those stories, then something bad happens to me, and I have that depleted sense of I have no resources, and then I'm injured. And so we talk about that as the intergenerational transmission of trauma, which is not just that my grandmother did it to my mother and my mother did it to me. It's literally in my genes. So it gives us a whole new understanding of helping communities that have historically struggled to find ways to feel empowered, right? And in all causes, and find those stories. And so much of what we do in day treatment is we help children use us, because that's the first thing. They come and, children come and you say, hi, I'm Ann, I'm going to help you. And they say, fuck you, bitch. And, you go, whoa, okay, we got to start this one. And he's got to learn to trust me, use me. But then the second part of the treatment is how we make sense of their stories. So when you call me that name, it tells me that you don't know me. And I'm sorry I surprised you. Let me tell you who I am, right? And then that's a story.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, hold on, over here. Oh, we got one here. We got two going. This is great.
I'm a little afraid to ask this, but how do you handle the story of your adopted child that had the abusive, drug-dealing birth father?
Well, it's a story, right? So the story for children who have had adversity is to make sense of it. So the first part is security. I know things were really hard, and the first mother didn't know how to take care of you, but this mother does, right? That's how we build security. And then you show it, show it, show it. We talk about attachment happening through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interactions. So we do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things to show, I can do it. I can do it. Look at me. I'm doing it. I'm doing it, right? So that security has to be in place. And then the second part is trauma is dangerous because it feels like it shatters time and space. So we get over trauma by saying that was then and that was there, and I'm okay now, right? So I still remember that, but I'm okay now. And I can drive around and do my life because I feel okay. I may always be a little nervous, say if I have a car accident, you know, when I come to that spot or when the road is slippery, but most of the time I can keep time and space. So what happens for young children is they need your help to say that was then and that was there and this is now. And we can know about this and I can answer your questions, but it wasn't your fault, right? That was then and that was there. Now, that's the kind of work that clinicians should be very helpful with families because these are hard things to talk about. They're emotional, they're sad, they're painful. And so having someone be a translator that can help a child and a parent talk that through is really helpful. I'm working with a little boy now who's 9, and he had a horrible teaching experience last year, just horrific. And it literally flipped him into a psychotic state. And he's so frightened. He wasn't adopted till 4, and so frightened. And literally that was the intervention today, that mom had to go home and say to him, it's not your fault and it's not my fault, and we can figure it out. So those stories is what we help children do.
The trauma happened as a baby.
Well,
And now he's 15.
So those stories, so one of the ways I got into trauma is I worked with a 11-month-old, who witnessed her father murder her mother. And all the literature said she wouldn't remember, except she did. And now the literature has totally reversed. And we used to say if they don't remember it, if they happen before 5, they won't remember it. We had this thing about language. Now we know that actually children pre-verbally remember it even more acutely because they remember it in their bodies. And it's held in their bodies. One of the famous trauma researchers has a lovely article called The Body Keeps Score. And that's what it's about. So as a 15-year-old, he can start to recall and develop his own narrative, but he has to pay attention to his body. And again, that's what mental health people should be helping people do. So a 15-year-old says, I don't want to know. And you say, yeah, but, you know, when somebody disappoints you, you get really, really upset. I think that's in your body. And then we start to put a narrative to it. Okay. We can help people with a lot when we keep clear what we're about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes.
Do we know what happened to what was his name? Joseph Labara?
Oh, Joseph LaBarbera. Do you know, I saw a textbook written by 3 doctors, and I thought it was him. And I actually called up the publisher, and it wasn't. So I don't know what happened to Joseph LaBarbera. I was so excited. I thought he made it. I don't know what happened.
Okay, so you talked about with the adoption that you should talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that square with divorce when you're told not to trash the other parent?
Well, so that's a really good question. And boy, it's so satisfying to trash the other parent. And it is. I mean, to stop loving someone, you kind of have to hate them a little. I mean, it's hard. So what we have to do with children is 2 things. We have to remember the child's experience with our partner is different than my experience with the partner. Right? So I have to respect that the child wants to love both parents. They just do. And they need to love both parents. And yet, find your own mind, as children interact with their parents, they have opinions. Now, when you're married, you do a lot of covering for your partner. You know, you kind of fill in the spaces, you help clean up the messes. When you're divorced, there's no one to clean up the messes. So children often learn to be disappointed with their other parent. And when the child says to you, you know, Dad never gets off his computer, then you don't have to say, oh, yes, he does. You say, wow, that's hard. So children figure it out when we allow them to know their own minds. And they need to figure it out, right? We don't want to put children into positions where they have to deny what they know. One of my earliest consultants said to me, crazy is knowing something you're not allowed to know, which is really a good message, right? So we want to help kids know. So it makes us have to think of the child. And the hardest part about divorce, especially a painful one, is that you want to protect your child. I want to protect my child from all their sadness. But I also know something that I wish my child would know. But it makes us humble. We know what we know, but they might have a different experience. It's best to stay married, and a lot of us don't. Other questions? Yes. Here it comes.
You said for both parents and teachers that understanding development is fundamental. What would you say are some of the best resources for that? Maybe it's something you put on the website later, but.
Well, you know, there's so many books. And I have not found a spectacular development book. I wish there was. Sometimes we joke about we should just write it. But it's a lot of work. There's a professional book called Child Development by Douglas Davies that we use in social work teaching, and the psychiatrists are using it. It's a really nice book because it talks about normal development, and then the next chapter it talks about work. But they've got great lists in the back about the developmental tasks. And I'm sure someone here would have a copy of it, and you could copy that. There used to be the Gazelle Institute had wonderful books, and they're still around. My 3-year-old, my 4-year-old. The trouble with a lot of these books is they stop. You know, they stop at like preschool, or they stop at age 10. There's lots of how-to books about like how to talk to your teenager. There's lots of books that, you know, I think bookstores are filled with books. Google tells you a lot. But the best way to learn about your child is to watch your child and watch your child with others. Because I think the more that, you know, you can get a feel, and just having that sense that, you know, if you, it says, so let me show you with high schoolers. I mean, really, 11, 12 is a lot like 1 and 2. You say to a group of 12 parents of middle school kids, do you feel like you're living with toddlers? And they laugh, and they laugh, and they're so relieved. You know, 13, 14, 15, it feels like you're working with preschoolers. You know, that same kind of energy. And then 16, 17, and 18, all of a sudden, they're pulling it together. And you go, whoa, something happened. So just, I find that thinking security, exploration, mastery really has helped me to use my own developmental imagination. Anyone know a good book?
Since you asked about child development, I can't resist a quick plug for the Washburn Center Training Institute. Right on our website, it's not a book, but there's 3 online courses that we have right through our website, the Training Institute part. One is specifically on child development, one is on attachment, and one is on childhood trauma. Those are available and out there right now. They're about an hour and a half and a fantastic combination of content and video. And there's new versions of those coming out later this fall.
Do you have a resource, Molly? I think The Emotional Life of a Toddler. Oh, The Emotional Life of a Toddler is a lovely book. That's been newly published. There's another one for teenagers. Daniel Siegel has a lot of good developmental books. Parenting from the Inside Out, and there's one for teenagers, and he just put a new one out, but I can't remember it. There's tons. There's so many books.
On the CDC website, there's a ton of parenting tips.
Right.
It's a succinct list.
Yeah, that's good.
On the CDC website, it's positive parenting tips. If you just Google that, there's a list, and it's not just academics. It's social, emotional, dieting, exercise, screen time. It has a lot on there, and it's updated pretty regularly.
You know that I have to spend quality time with my child, otherwise I become dysfunctional. I really owe a lot of my developmental knowledge to being a parent. I mean, the children just teach you a lot. If you can pause enough to say, whoa, what's going on? And that's hard. Yes?
I just wanted to follow up on something you said about development not being linear.
Yes,
And T. Berry Brazelton's touch points
yes,
is
that's a classic.
a very important concept that as children grow and master, there's always periods of regression or just plateauing before they're kind of gathering their energy for the next big leap in development. For example, when a 2-year-old is not quite ready to talk, but his brain is going a mile a minute, and they get ornery and frustrated and oppositional. And it's just because their frustration is really high.
Right.
And it's really good to remember those points because those are the times that the kids are struggling.
Yes, and that's really good. That's such a good reminder that often when your child is most difficult, like it seems like girls do it around 13, boys seem to do it sometimes a little later, but they're just, you can barely live with them. And then they get so lovely, right? And it's really not that they were bad. It's that they're trying to put it together. And that process, I think as adults, we don't have as much movement forward in regression. Usually we have regression when hard things are happening. But that's so right, Sloan, that's part of development, is that 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it's kind of consolidating, so it's not quite yours yet. So when your child is really driving you crazy, call a friend who has a child 6 months older. It helps. And they'll say, oh, yeah, I remember that. And then you feel better. Yeah. Yes.
Yep, definitely don't. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your work in the Minneapolis public schools and what some of that looks like.
So I went into the Minneapolis public schools about 7 years ago. I was asked to go to one of the North Side schools, Lucy Laney, because they were really struggling with, it was a high-risk population. They had 97% free and reduced lunches. And the principal knew that, that she needed to do something, but she didn't know what to do. So it was very interesting because I went in and they paid everyone for the first meeting. So when you go into schools, you know this, you come for an hour, but that means 7:17 to 8:09, right? And that bell rings and everyone's out. And so we had less than an hour, and this huge crowd came. And then she invited me to come back, and she said maybe 10 or 15 people would come. We never had less than 55 people because they were a staff that was really struggling. And I used to say privately, you know, I'm trying to help teachers not be mean to kids because that's really what it was about. Not that they intended to, but people, we get so stressed from up here down and down here up. Are you a teacher? Okay. Okay. So we get so stressed that we get dysregulated. And when we get dysregulated, then we become mean. And it, not with intention, but dysregulation is a really impactful, just unpleasant experience. So we started talking about how could teachers understand kids better. And I've gone to different schools doing that. Bernice is here. She was a principal at Holland. The challenge is we can give teachers ideas, but then getting into the classroom and figuring out how to do it is such important work. So one of the things that I'm doing now is trying to think of ways to really translate mental health knowledge into education knowledge that doesn't burden teachers. Well, you know, for a while we said to teachers, remember they had to take 2 credits and be able to identify and respond to major mental illnesses. What were we thinking? I mean, I took a whole master's degree before I could identify, but I didn't know how to respond. So we've got to respect that teachers are there to help children learn. We've got to help teachers realize that why some children don't learn. And then we've got to provide them with some support and ideas that will help them learn. So the way I got into Minneapolis was because part of our day treatment model was half day. You have the full day. and we'd go into the schools. So we were always going in and trying to transfer what we were learning in the group into the school. And teachers have a very hard job, especially some of our urban schools. And again, I think this achievement gap is not just because children aren't exposed to ABCs. I think it's because some of our schools are still frightening to children. And when you're frightened, you can't learn. So we have a lot of work. Oh, I'm getting impassioned. Ask me some more about kids. Yes. Yes, I think so. I think it's coming. I think that door is locked. Oh, it's not. Hooray, hooray, hooray. I should say my work in Minneapolis Public Schools I share with a lot of Washburn staff. And we're really trying to think about more how do we become partners with educators, partners with child protection. When I first started working with child protection, there was a lot of distance. You know, they were responsible. And boy, we worked really hard to say, you can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. Nobody can do it alone. So that's what I mean by a community. We've really got to all figure out how to march in the same direction so we're not doing it alone.
Thank you so much. I'm a new grandparent of the most glorious 16-month-old child who ever was born, by the way. My daughter's a social worker, and she actually did one of her field placements here. I'm also a nurse, and I do research in end-of-life care and palliative care. And my mind is just spinning here because a colleague of mine and I are now doing a study about children who were abused or neglected as children, come back to care for the adult who abused them at end of life. And in hospice and palliative care, and in nursing especially, we do not do a good job of opening a big space where people can, we call dying family members loved ones, drives me crazy. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your model.
It's an excellent question.
And how this model could be applied to clinical practice.
So one of the problems when we first started to work with children who were abused and neglected, it was back in the 70s. And we had a very naive idea that we would take children in a family where they were being maltreated, and we would pluck them up and plant them in a new family, and they would thrive. And we totally lost the power of biological familiarity. We all want to know from whom we came. Now, the second thing that happens is when I'm a child, I have no rule book about what's good parenting and what's bad parenting. I just have a parent, right? So even when I'm abused and neglected, many children will internalize that as either it's my fault or it's just the way it is because I love my parent. So it's fascinating that these are coming back because I think that biological tie is incredibly strong. So I think rather than being surprised by it, and I love your question, is that we have to create environments where people can repair relationships and take them for what they are, can kind of get what's best out of them. You know, it's very humbling being a parent, I'll tell you. It's very humbling being a parent. And it's a little satisfying being a grandparent and having your child tell you that now she understands something you did because she just did it. And you feel a little forgiven. But we all make mistakes, right? We're not fully conscious as parents. That's one of the things that I think we love about grandparenting. We can be so much more present, right? Because we're not in it. You know, it's like that phrase, you can't see the forest for the trees. So I think people always make mistakes, and hopefully whatever is reciprocal and negotiated between us can allow us to have what's best. Now, some people can never repair it. Most people try to repair it. So your work is very impressive because how do you help people do end-of-life care and feel like they get something out of it? Children always want something from their parents.
Thank you.
Ooh, we're all over the place. Anything else? This is
We
fun.
have time for maybe one final question. Great.
So my question was on adversity and resiliency.
Yes.
So I'm a peer mentor to college students, and I a lot of times talk about how you handle barriers and viewing it as a challenge and a way to grow versus a failure. And even that as college students and early adults is really hard to grasp. So I'm wondering if there's a way or techniques that you can do even in childhood to encourage that complexity in handling resiliency and barriers.
Okay, great last question. So Tom knows this. I love improv. I don't do improv, but I love improv. And I did this workshop once that was so much fun. I partnered with an improv actor, and he did all the work, and then I just got to comment. And it was great because I think I commented the first 2 times, then the audience just took over. Improv is about being real. And one of the challenges with being a mentor is you have a lot of ideas you want to give these students. And giving ideas is giving too. But we know learning happens best when you do it with. And practice is how we get our brains to change. So I learned this with my computer. I'd hire a computer expert, and I'm such a conscientious person. I would sit next to him, and I'd write down every single thing he said, and I was learning it, and he would barely be around the corner, and I would look at it, and I wouldn't have a clue, right? Not a clue. Nothing went in because it was doing to me, right? So one of the challenges our clinicians have, similar to you, is they go out and do skill training. But you don't train a skill by just telling someone to do it. You have to figure out how to make it real. So that idea of practice, that idea of try it, that idea of when you're frightened, you can avoid or you can give it a try, the idea of coming back and tell me how it went. What did you notice about yourself? Do you see? It's all that stuff that makes it alive.
So could that be like the kind of giving homework? Sorry. Yeah, could that be like giving homework to your students, in a sense, homework, and saying,
yes,
why don't you do this within the next 2 weeks, and then come back to me and tell you.
I have a very anxious young woman who gets overwhelmed at dinners, and her family is Jewish. And so she went home tonight, and she's going to think about what scares her about Yom Kippur dinner. And then when I see her on Monday, we're going to think about what she learned about herself. So you want to keep it active, all right? You want to keep everybody active in the process, and you want to practice, all right? Because your mentees will say, I can't do it. And you'll say, well, I think someday you'll be able to do it. Why don't we try it tomorrow or whatever? Active, active.
And you think you can even do that with young children as well?
We can do. You go to the Apple store. There's a lot of people looking like me trying to figure out how to do their phones. And those people are practicing, right? And they have us all do it. That's how our brain works, all right? Our brain is a pattern-seeking, meaning-making machine. And if I get the new pattern in, then I give myself the meaning I can do it. But if I take the pattern and say, I don't know how to do this, it's different from what I know, I'm going to stick with the familiar, right? Then I'm going to give myself a meaning I can't do it. Resilience is defined as the ability to keep growing in the face of adversity. It's all it is, right? You just keep going. Good luck.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much.
So all of the trainings and the services that we provide here at Washburn Center every year, we hosted 31 trainings through the Training Institute, and we served over 3,000 children here in 2017. As part of our mission, we have a really deep commitment to making the training that we do and the services we provide available and affordable to everyone who needs them, for services regardless of income or insurance status. And with training, we want to make them available to everyone as much as possible. We can only do that through the incredibly generous support of the hundreds of donors who help to support events like this. And tonight, I want to in particular recognize and thank the donors who made both tonight's event possible, but also the whole 4-part community dialogue series that we did over the last year. So Leslie and Stuart Crosby, a huge thank you to both of you. Stuart's not here, but Leslie's right up here. And then Brent and Marilyn Marmo, and Agency Squid have been sponsors and helped us to plan and organize this thing all the way through. I mentioned earlier the Training Institute. Right at the back, little wave, Lauren. Lauren Neitz is the director of our Training Institute. We're going to create the series again in 2019, and the theme will be helping children heal from early traumatic experiences. We'll be back here again in January, and Lauren will be presenting our lead-off presentation in that event for the 2019 series, and we plan to host 3 events again here next year. I mentioned some of the online trainings we have available. We'll post the recording of the training tonight. There's also a number of other incredible free and low-cost resources that you can access right through our website as well. Resources for parents, videos, training. Take a look at all of that. You can also follow us on social media. I don't know how to tweet, but apparently we both have a Twitter account. And Lauren, you can follow Anne on...
And I speak.
On, yes, Lauren has actually been tweeting during this event, which is something you can apparently do. It's at Dev Repair if you're a Twitter follower. So check that out. Coming up just in 2 weeks, there will also be the Washburn Games, which is an absolute blast. 3 hours of recess, any sport imaginable for kids age 3 to 12, right over here at Bryn Mawr Meadows. Same thing, all that stuff is on our website. And let me make sure there isn't anything else I have to make sure to list. We've got everything covered for tonight, so the very last thing is a huge thank you for showing up and for being an advocate and supporting children's mental health. Thank you.